human rights in Africa. I want to ask one question, then open the floor to other people. I think you paint quite an optimistic picture. I mean, for people who in this room, there are people who've spent their working lives tried to do something about quality of life and so on. I would say there's a lot of people who are depressed about the status of human rights in Africa. The fact that as part of our Cotonou agreement, we make it an essential element of our cooperation. But I think historically the essential element clause has been more or less put in the top drawer, and it's been business as usual. We build roads and hospitals and so on. And although there are certain cases where we've actually taken, we've invoked the various procedures in Lomé and Cotonou, basically this is, we fight shy ourselves in the European Union of this. Now, you only have to see the brutality of the police in some cases and people's basic rights being not respected at all. If you travel around in Africa, I mean, you don't get the sense that human rights per se has much importance in the body politic nor the daily lives of people. And I wonder how you address that, and how we as an institution address that, because it's for us, I think it's a critical problem. You say human rights is the idea, which I rather liked at the beginning, the idea of our time. But I have very serious misgivings myself about whether the idea is already gone, and in fact we have a different agenda. So you gave quite a progressive talk, but I mean, on the introduction you said basically only 3 functioning human rights institutions in Africa. This is not a good picture to start with. And I just wonder where you feel real priority should be given, how we should change perception mentalities to progress that balance. But perhaps I can just also open the floor. I suggest that if you want to make your questions, please state who you are and your interest, and we'll try and cover as many questions as possible. We'll perhaps do rounds of 3. I don't know how much time you have, but let's just see. I see yes, I see one person already.
I'm Abis Book. I'm desk officer for Guinea-Conakry and Togo in DG Development. I've got a question that links in with what Tim just asked. I also have the impression that the situation not really that much improving in Africa. You touched a lot on the legislative evolution and institutional capacities that are developing. But could you give us an indication of what progress has been achieved in reality in the reduction of non-respect of human rights in Africa in general? Can you give us an indication that there's a positive trend? The reason why I'm saying this is because while we're working on improving the institutional framework in Africa, at the same time the African countries seem to work together, also in the framework, say, of the UN Human Rights Committee, to fend off criticism from the UN. So while we are making progress on one end, there seems to be a lack of progress on the other end. The second question that I have is a link to the Cotonou Agreement. We have enshrined in the Cotonou Agreement the respect of the essential elements, which is respect for human rights, democracy, and so on, to our development cooperation. Do you think this is a good development to link those two? To appreciate your ideas about this. Thank you.
Yeah, I see a hand in the back.
Francesca, the Council Secretariat in Human Rights. I, with my colleague, who were assisting at the Commission on Human Rights recently, finished the end of April, where we saw the defeat of our resolution on Sudan, the loss of our no action of the African Group's no action motion and our resolution on Zimbabwe. We saw our resolution on the DRC still being adopted by consensus, but I'd be very interested to hear your views as to the utility of these instruments in pursuing, in the European Union's pursuit of its human rights policy vis-à-vis Africa, given the resistance that there is within the Commission and the way that the African Group operates as a body to block measures which it sees as being hostile hostile to itself. It hasn't yet decided to gang up on the DRC resolution, but I'm sure that's just a matter of time. I'm wondering, do you have any advice for us as to how to see in the longer term how perhaps to look at other ways of addressing the situation in Africa in international fora like the UN?
Take one more and then I'll pass.
Well, there seems to be a general theme in the three questions, which is, I don't think it's surprising in the sense of to some extent, where are we going with the whole system? Is one in a way wasting your time to work with the concept of human rights within Africa? Well, I would want to give a number of answers on a number of levels. One is that I don't really know what the alternatives are. I would certainly think the issues of Africa working as a bloc, it's something which one sees in a number of forums, and that's what worries me also about the concept of peer review, if one wants to introduce that on the level of human rights. I think it can actually do more damage than it does good if one goes there. That's why we want to go the other way. Whether the African court in the short term is going to give a lot of results, I also not too optimistic about it. Once one has binding decisions, once one has a situation where sovereignty is infringed, one would certainly have also in the appointment of judges the danger that countries will not be too keen to have very independent judges there. And once the judges are there, they will be concerned about whether their decisions will be respected. If they give any one decision that's not respected, then they will lose face, and that's the only thing they have, is their legitimacy. So I think in the short term, at least, if you deal with a very diverse continent as Africa is, in terms of religion, in terms of culture, in terms of levels of poverty, language, very diverse in all respects, once you have a margin of appreciation, which will inevitably have to come in, it's a question how effective the court will be. So peer review, I think, will almost have the situation of going to the lowest level denominator. On the other hand, a court, the stronger system might be not the most effective, precisely because it's strong, and then the temptation will be to undermine it. So the court I don't see a very short term. Maybe in the long term, and it takes a long time for these things to be established. Yes, so the idea of a court in the long run will give more teeth. It's worth pursuing, but don't place one's hopes there. But I would say, to some extent, the question is also what is the alternative? If you can't base development on human rights in Africa, then on what other ground can one really base it? I know it's a bit of a desperate argument to say there's nothing else that one can do. But if Africa is to thrive at any point, if one is to retain hope in Africa, then I think one would have to believe at some point it will have to start developing. And then the two options would be, to some extent, conditionality, the linkage of development, especially if it's targeted, if it's not, if it activates local pressure points. For example, if there are national human rights institutions that are strengthened in the process, so that it's not a continuous imposition of ideas from the outside, but you create an institution and NGOs as well. And coming from academic background, I don't think one should underestimate the effect that education in the long term can have. So if you have a master's program, which in the bigger picture might be a small contribution, but you do start creating local pressure points, local energy that will go towards the protection of human rights. So there's also, to some extent, if one mentions the legal protection of human rights, the formal recognition, then I think at some point one says, yes,